things that we experience on a day-to-day basis that will really sneak up on you and cause the hearing damage you didn't expect. Your hearing is really important, and once it's gone, you don't get it back. Let's talk about it. Now, I'm going to cover a few things in this video. I'm going to cover hearing protection for really, really loud things. I'm going to talk about concerts. I'm going to talk about musicians, and so on. But this also applies to just regular listening to music. I want to start off with a Reddit comment that I read that's a really good way to sum it up. Your hearing is like you have a million $1 bills, and you have that many to last you your entire life. That's basically your hearing. Every time you're listening to something, you are spending a little bit of that currency, and really loud sounds will use it up much faster. Even something like just a loud conversation, you only have so much hearing exposure you can have to that before it causes damage. Let's say you're a moderately quiet listener, you listen in like the mid-70s, well, you're still getting peaks up in the 80s. At 85 decibels, you can have 8 hours of exposure. That's the maximum amount of time you should be exposed to it in one sitting. This is why people who are like landscapers and whatnot that don't wear hearing protection have lots of hearing loss, just constant exposure to loud noise. Even if it's not as loud as a rock concert or a gunshot, it's still exposure to higher than ambient noise for a prolonged period of time. Just 3 decibels louder and the amount of exposure time cuts in half down to 4 hours. This trend continues. The amount of time keeps cutting in half. At 100 decibels, it's only 15 minutes. At 109 decibels, it's under 2 minutes, and rock concerts can hit this volume, sometimes louder. At 127 decibels, it's 1 second. 130, less than a second, and at 140, there is no amount of exposure that is safe for your ears. Anything over 140 decibels is going to cause instantaneous hearing damage. And that is the realm where you get into things like this. This is a Glock 43X, this is a Beretta 92FS, and this is a Smith & Wesson MMP 15. All of these will cause instantaneous hearing damage if you're not using protection, but all 3 can still cause hearing damage if you're not wearing the right protection or enough. That's why I took all of these to an indoor range with my Brüel & Kjær 4128C head and torso simulator, SPL calibrated. Here's what I learned. And I want to give a quick thank you to my local shooting range, Bullseye in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, for allowing me to use their facility. My normal go-to are these Walkers. They're passive, and I also use earplugs underneath. I highly recommend these Walker earplugs. They are rated for 32 decibels of isolation. The problem here is that pretty much all these firearms, 9mm and above, produce sounds in excess of 160 decibels. This 5.56 gets closer to 166 to 167 decibels. So even if you're taking 32 decibels off that, assuming you have a perfect seal with your earplugs, that is still well into the realm of hearing damage, especially given it's going to be repeated exposures. Now these are all raw spectrum analysis. Peak of that white line where it hits 140 decibels, that is the point of no return. That is the point where you do have hearing damage from the exposure. And that red line, well, that's what all 3 of these are like at an indoor range. This blue line, this is just with a set of passive isolating earmuffs. And something to note, the passive ones are generally much stronger at isolating than the active ones, but it won't really matter, and here's why. Now, this is still helping a lot over just the unprotected ear, but it is not enough. This is at a level where you're still likely going to be giving yourself hearing damage, especially given that it's going to be repeated exposure. At an outdoor range, you could probably get away with it. You'll probably get about 10 less decibels, but it's still very significant. This green line here is with double protection. Earplugs in, and then over-ear hearing protection on top of that. And the 2 additional gray lines here, well, that's the difference between the active set and the passive set, which is not really a significant difference. This is getting well under 100 decibels. Now, it's still pretty loud. At this level, you could experience around 30 minutes of exposure before you have hearing damage. Now, that's constant exposure, whereas this is more in just peaks, so you can go for definitely longer. Active sets like this, if you turn them on, you can still hear your voice and the world around you, but anytime a super loud sound comes in, it basically cuts off the microphones and the speakers so that super loud sound doesn't come through. This is really useful so you can still talk to people around you. And while these do not isolate nearly as well on their own as just these straight up super thick passive ones, once you have in-ears in, it pretty much gets them into the same safety range. Now, if you were firing like an elephant gun or something crazy like that, I would say get the passives and earplugs. But for pretty much everything reasonable, even up to like a 30-06, this isn't going to make a massive difference as long as you are actually wearing proper earplugs underneath them. And if you're wondering, well, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? Because with earplugs, you won't be able to hear what people are saying even with the actives. No, you definitely can. With the actives, you can turn them up a fair bit to where you can still understand what people are saying a lot easier than on the passives, but it won't allow that extra sound through from the ultra loud sounds like gunshots. Now, these are definitely on the more dangerous end of things that are going to instantly take away your hearing, but there's a lot more to consider than just that. A standard drum set ranges between 90 and 130 decibels. Now, assume that you're somewhere in the middle of that. Let's say 115 decibels at your drum set. That's less than 1 minute of exposure before you cause hearing damage. Less than 1 minute of playing the drums. And in a scenario like that, well, you really should be using hearing protection. If you really want to hear everything around you, something like this actually isn't a bad idea, these active hearing sets, so you can still hear pretty clearly everything going on, but the volume's just brought down by a solid amount. But in my opinion, what makes the most sense is a set of earplugs that will attenuate but not completely cut out sound. You don't want everything to be super muffled, right? You still want to be able to hear your guitar, other people talking, vocalists, and hear really the rhythm of what you're doing without it just being bass. There's earplugs out there made specifically for that, so they bring down the overall level but don't just push the highs down into oblivion. Dakoni actually sells these for $24. They call them the earplugs with a Z, and I highly recommend them, not for anything to do with shooting, but very much so for musicians, people who are drummers and whatnot. If you're on stage, you're probably using an active monitor in your ear, but if you're just a musician practicing at home or playing local gigs, you should really look into something like this, especially if you're a person who's attending concerts, attending live music. You should be protecting your ears, and this is a really good way to do it. They come with a little carrying case. I actually use a set that's just like these that's made by Sennheiser. Now, this is something to pay attention to just listening to music also, because you're not going to want to put on your headphones and wear earplugs under them. Just listen at a responsible level. Now, this may be surprising to you, but there's a lot of people out there who feel like their headphones just don't go loud enough. People who buy like AirPods Pros and want to listen louder than they can go, but AirPods Pros can get in excess of 100 decibels. So 15 minutes or less of maximum exposure before you cause hearing damage at the max volume of an AirPod Pro. And there are people out there who want to buy IEMs that are louder than an AirPod Pro, people who don't have hearing damage yet, but will quickly gain hearing damage listening with these sort of habits. It's also easy to do if you're listening in a loud environment. Let's say that you have a washing machine running and you're using open back headphones. It's pretty easy to push into the upper 80s in terms of decibels. Then you're limited to between 2 and 4 hours. Now, that's still a while, but it's worth considering. Let's say that you're on a road trip riding in a car, and that car is probably producing in the upper 70s to low 80s of just road and wind noise and all that stuff. And so you turn up your music a little bit more since you're on the highway. It may not sound super loud, but you could be in a pretty dangerous range, especially if you're driving for 5 hours, 6 hours. And while there are plenty of things like this that are extremely obvious will cause hearing damage, especially in a near instant sense, it's a lot of other things that we experience on a day-to-day basis that will really sneak up on you and cause the hearing damage you didn't expect. Because again, once you damage your hearing, you don't get it back. Once that damage is done, it is permanent. Now, there are hearing implants you can get, but it's not going to be the same. So do me a favor, guys. Be conscious in your day-to-day lives. Think about the things you're exposing yourself to, even if it's not a super loud, instantaneous sound, if it's just a dull, slightly louder noise that drones on in the background, that could affect your hearing in the long run. And I really think that's worth being mindful of. If you love music as much as I do, and I know a lot of you guys do, if not even more, then this is something you should really care about. And, if you don't, you can always buy some Bayer Dynamics. I'm just messing with you guys. If you like this video, leave a like down below. If you want me to expand on a topic like this more, leave that in a comment too. If you want to get active in the community, you can at the forum or Discord, both available at the link in the video description, or get access to some cool extra behind-the-scenes content on Floatplane. And as always, don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till next one, guys. Peace.